So welcome everybody to our session on 5G. We're going to spend the next 1.5 hours, or now in the meantime 1 hour, 30, 20 something minutes, talking about 5G and beyond and opportunities. And it's my pleasure to introduce, look here, I have a sneak sheet, introduce the panel. So we have Matti, who was born in, I cannot say this, Kuivaniemi, whatever, something like that. He was born in Finland. And in Finland they have these funny names, isn't that nice? So he's been working at the University of Oulu since gazillion of years, it seems like, and has been really contributing a lot in the wireless domain already, starting with CDMA, all the way to 4G and 5G and beyond, and has just been awarded a gigantomanic project on 6G research. So Matti, we're going to be sure that we're going to hear everything about 6G from Matti. Then we have Ted Rappaport, who is, these days he is, in the US at least, he's Mr. Millimeter Wave Communications. He's really pioneered have the idea of pushing for millimeter wave, not only in terms of Wi-Fi or wireless LANs, which is sort of what has been done in the 90s in Europe a lot, and WiGig is a result of that. But he's really been pushing the prospect of millimeter wave in a cellular context, and he's basically Mr. Channel sounding and channel modeling, I would say. And these days he's at NYU heading many different things. I don't want to talk about all the things you had. And before that he was at UT Austin, and before that he was at Virginia Tech. Then we have Amitava Ghosh. Amitava is Nokia fellow, yes. And he identified Rasika yesterday for us, and Ted negotiated the table for us, so we had a fantastic dinner at Rasika. Amitava has been with Motorola near Chicago for many years, and then has switched over with his team to Nokia. He's, as I said, a Nokia Bell Labs fellow. He's a very distinguished person in millimeter wave implementation, so has worked a lot with different people, also with Ted, obviously, and has been sort of the pioneer showing that 28 gigs can actually be done, and has some prospects for wireless, not only in terms of theory, but really building modems and these kind of things. Then we have David Korman. He's a program director at the National Science Foundation, the US National Science Foundation. He has a broad range of research interests spanning many technologies. Basically, he's a Mr. CPS. In his division, obviously, there's also 5G, but we have him here on the panel not as Mr. 5G, but as one of the core application areas of 5G, the tactile internet, cyber physical systems. How can we use 5G as basically a generalization of remote controls, controlling all kinds of objects. So cyber physical systems normally are just locally, but really networked over the wireless network. And so that's why it's very interesting to have him here on the panel. He has a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Maryland, so just around the corner. And he's a local. Yes. So those are our 4 experts. And to get started, do we have a clicker, or I just use the clicker? Yeah, the clicker's right. Oh, there's, this is too transparent, I cannot. So I would say, let's get started with the 5G plenary and beyond. Just some introductory slides from my side to make sure that, it's just 4 slides, don't worry. So we have been working in this area of 5G and trying to identify the topics of possible collaboration across the Atlantic. We assembled this expert group, as you can see here. Amitava has been meeting in many of the meetings, Matti as well. But the good news is we have David and Ted here now adding their level of expertise. So we gathered all the expertise of these people in multiple rounds of discussions and wrote some papers on that. The general strategy was to say, let's identify not the grand scale topics Why not the grand scale topics? Because the grand scale topics are so big and so important, they're going to be funded by the European Commission and by the US separately anyhow. So if it's about joint collaboration, it's especially identifying those niche topics that would be big enough to fund if you had a joint collaboration, but within each continent, it might not be big enough of a story. So that's why we said, let's talk about topics like connecting the last billion ultra-large cells. So it's actually not 1 billion, it's connecting the last 2.5 billion people or 3 billion people on planet Earth that do have GSM access but no internet. They only can get 9.6 kilobit per second. And so how do we build systems of the future so that we really can cover the last billion in many places on planet Earth? And if you talk about that in the US, it's always, oh, there's no business. And if you talk about that in Europe, it's always, oh, there's no business. But if you look at it jointly, yes, there's a lot of business opportunity. The other part is meaning 100 gigs and beyond. The third one, because there we say, currently the focus is there's a gold rush in the below 100 gigs range, but start pioneering ideas looking beyond 100 gigs is something which is probably, as we noticed in the European Commission, I had multiple proposals that I've submitted, and every one of them was told to be stupid because who's interested in beyond 100 gigs? Now we see FCC has already opened a call for ideas, so it is not that stupid. But obviously in the European Commission, it was considered to be out of reach. And so we came together and said, this is something really where we can join forces. But maybe the speed is so heated up so much in the meantime over the last months in the US that this is not a topic of joint interest anymore because the US is pounding on it already. So this is something we can talk about. A third one is narrowband IoT devices. Basically trying to understand this from a supply chain management and trying to see how we can get true global narrowband IoT coverage, also on oceans, to track containers and everything. The fourth one was ultra-wideband RFICs at millimeter wave frequencies, saying this is something that really needs to be done, and there is somehow not enough traction in the semiconductor support area in both sides. The fifth one was V2X for regional niche markets, meaning not the standard part of it, but look, for example, for agriculture. Yes, John Deere, Claas, you name them, they all need this kind of stuff to control their next range of harvesters and other niche markets like that are not so niche. Then SATCOMs, that sort of connects to the ultra-large cells again, and then spectrum farming. So those were the topics we identified as possible topics for collaboration. And as I mentioned, the line of argument is to choose topics that are not yet of the scope to be big enough to be funded in one region on its own. Now we have our panel session, and now we go in 5G and beyond. And just to get started, let's have Matti with his, and then we'll talk about some summary slides later on. Matti.
Thank you, Gerhard. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me get going right away. We have something ongoing already with USA, between Finland and USA since, I believe, 2012. We were one of the first 2 or 3 programs that were launched in Science Across Virtual Institutes program launched by NSF, SAVI program. And we have gone through 4 solicitations, and of course the funding instrument from NSF side has changed over the years. We have had 4 solicitations, and currently we have, I believe, 9 or 10 projects ongoing. One example is that we have joint project with TED, and there are many others. It has been really fruitful ground for collaboration. Some of our staff members collected statistics from our own group, CWC group from Oulu. Between 13 and 17, we produced 211 joint publications with US groups, coming from 45 different universities and research institutes. I would call that really extensive collaboration. I believe the numbers from other universities from Finland are almost as good as this one. So it has proven to be really, really great, and we hope that NSF will look forward to continue funding it in the future. Decisions have to be made in a few months' time if you want to go for that at the US side. I'm the national coordinator at Finland side, and that's why I'm bringing this up. Now, a couple of challenges that I would like to bring up when we talk about beyond 5G communication systems. We have to push the center frequencies towards terahertz frequency bands. This is our guess we made in 2015, what will happen in 5G. We guessed that time that 5G will be based on 4G evolution, which is pretty much the case, and we will be focusing at relatively low frequency bands. Then we predicted that there will be something revolutionary 5G, paving the way towards 6G world, aiming at serious deployment of millimeter waves, and that should take place 7 years from now, roughly. Then we also predicted there might be something on super efficient short-range radio where we really are pushing towards terahertz frequency bands, and that might take a bit more time in order to have really cost-efficient implementations in place. Of course, all this also means that inevitably, since most of the communication takes place in indoor environments, we are talking about really ultra small cells and densification in really massive scale. So this we all radio guys know that this is inevitable path, but something which is not discussed enough, I didn't want to bring it here too much for discussion, but also these changes of network architectures and radio technologies, they will definitely change also the business landscape. What are the value chains? Who are going to invest and deploy the networks? Who are offering services? We will be seeing a lot of verticals becoming stronger and stronger and deriving how our field is developing in the future. A second bigger challenge is actually this very nice white paper published by Ericsson earlier this month, where it's very, let's say, high-level discussion as it's a white paper, but they're talking about and painting the landscape. What does it mean when we want to bring artificial intelligence and machine learning to be integral part of wireless networks of the future? And some of the research challenges are coming from the real-time operation, distributed and decentralized intelligence as a part of network edge, how we go from machine learning to machine reasoning so that they really can make decisions autonomously as the different verticals will be calling for autonomous operation of wireless networks. How do we make sure that human-machine interaction is something that we humans are natively eager to jump into? The last one, but probably the most important one, security, safety, and trust. If there is even a small probability for any kind of misuse of these autonomous systems, then they are doomed to die before they are born. So many critical issues, and we do believe that this line of research should be urged these days as the development is really fast, and we have to develop profound understanding on these. Then, as Gerhard nicely also already pointed out, we very recently got really huge national research grant to focus on 6G systems for the next 8 years or so. So there was a national competition, and they chose these wireless communications and bioeconomy and related materials as the second one. There's another round of applications, and those will be launched somewhere next year. So it's 4 + 4 year program. Volume, our budget is 251 million euros, so it's really extensive program. And we can do lots of different things. In the beginning, we have identified these 4 focus areas for our research. Wireless connectivity, devices and circuit technology, distributed computing, and services and applications. There are some buzzwords here, just giving you an idea what are the current things that we are doing in each of these areas. The most critical ones I would like to emphasize again are these device and circuit technology towards terahertz frequency bands, as well as distributed computing, making this intelligent wireless networking possible in the future. Something that was recently launched here in the US, 5G power platforms, 2 of those which were launched In Europe, we have been developing similar platforms already some years, and in Finland we have something called 5G test network, open test network, where the main parts are located in Oulu and Helsinki regions, and they are open platforms. Anybody who wants to collaborate with us can join us. Just go to follow these websites to sign in to get some more information. Our test network is commercial grade. We started to build it from the latest toys, mainly from Nokia, and we gradually augment our test network facility with proof of concept radios. For example, we were demonstrating in Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games jointly with Nokia and Korean colleagues some 5G capabilities by using our 28 gig beamformed proof of concept 5G radio. That was shortly my presentation.
Thank you, Matti. So with this, I would say, Ted, you don't have a presentation as always because you're so vivid, but you always have statements. So let's get started.
Okay. Thank you, Gerhard. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Matti. Matti and I have been collaborating off and on since the early 2000s when he invited me to Oulu and we drank black tar together. So it's an amazing... Pine tar. I just remember it was a very dark liquid. I had never had that. But Oulu is an amazing university, kind of in the northern part of Finland, and they have this vast research center. So congratulations on the 6G. I work at NYU. I'm the founding director of NYU Wireless, which is probably the largest research center in wireless communications in the United States. We have about 12 faculty and 100 graduate students working, and we have 16 industrial affiliate companies from most continents of the world, and representing the major manufacturers of base stations, mobile phones, and chipsets for the wireless industry. We started the center in 2012, and before that I started wireless centers at UT Austin and at Virginia Tech. I thought just to level set the audience, it'd be worth taking 45 seconds to talk about what does G mean in the wireless industry. The cellular industry is about 40 years old. The Wi-Fi industry, the chips we use in our laptops and now mobile phones, is about 30 years old. Every 10 years, there's another generation of cellular. So in 40 years, we've had 4G. The first generation of cellular, 1G, was the analog mobile phone. You could intercept cell phone calls on scanners in the 80s and early 90s. And what's remarkable is 2G came along when the first digital modulation, sending digital ones and zeros instead of analog FM over the airways, evolved in the early 90s. Europe had a very interesting position in the mobile revolution because Europe was faced with the difficulty of bringing all the different countries that had different radio spectrum allocations all together in a pan-European standard so that you could talk between France and the UK and Germany all on one phone system. So they created GSM, Global System Mobile, which was the first digital 2G system in Europe, and it became very popular around the world. The US, however, took a different path, and we developed 2G in a couple of different ways. The first digital telephones were either digital cellular by companies like Bell South and AT&T back then in the early 90s, and then other companies, more maverick companies like Sprint and Verizon, took on a standard developed by Qualcomm, an American company that manufactured a revolutionary approach to cellular, which was using CDMA, or code division multiple access. So in 2G around the world in the early to mid-90s, you had two competing global standards, a US-based one, 2G, doing digital when SMS and early text started, and you had GSM evolving in Europe and around the rest of the world. So this was very interesting. In the mid to late 90s, Wi-Fi started to catch on, so now you had Wi-Fi competing for bandwidth and access to the mobile device, a very early form of that. And then 3G, this kind of US and European approach led to more advanced wideband channels where you could carry more and more data over the digital phone. And so now in 3G, your cell phone started to really become an early web browser, very primitive, but the web was starting to evolve in the early 2000s. Just to put it in perspective, 1G voice is about what your ear can hear. 2G with data is about what a small television channel would be. 3G started to become like a couple of compressed television channels. And so you had this competing European originated GSM approach evolving into the late 90s or early 2000s, and you had this US Qualcomm-based approach, and roughly had equal market share around the world. And then 4G was the first unification where Qualcomm made some acquisitions, the European manufacturers made some acquisitions, they all got together and they decided on one international standard called LTE, or 4G, which all of us pretty much enjoy today in the modern world. 4G is amazing bandwidths, 5 to 20 megahertz, which means you could actually carry several television channels on an individual call if you wanted to. And in fact, it's this kind of amazing capacity that exists in today 4G that's driving companies like AT&T to acquire Time Warner for the content and DirecTV to be able to distribute wireless to your handheld device. In 5 to 10 years, it's very conceivable we'll all be watching TV on our iPads, on our small phones, on our Androids, and you really won't have much of the TV as we think about it today. Well, so 4G, there was a unification, one standard, 4G LTE, and now we're all talking about 5G, where the bandwidths now go from 20 megahertz, which can carry several TV channels, up to bandwidths of 400 megahertz or 500 megahertz, which could carry hundreds of television channels of content. Or equivalently, download a full-length movie to your phone in under a couple of seconds. So that's what 5G is, bringing this huge fiber optic connectivity to your mobile device. That's where we're going in wireless. In 2011 and 2012, my students and I did some research to show that new frequencies that had never been thought ever before to be able to work could actually provide this kind of coverage in urban areas where the radio signals don't have line of sight. Radio propagation is always a trouble. You know how your phone drops. Well, we went up to millimeter wave frequencies where you can get much wider bandwidth channels, and Monty's graphic showed that as we go up to higher Gs, you get higher bandwidth. That is the ability to carry much more capacity. So we proved to the world that millimeter wave could work, and what's interesting is the US government, the FCC, really got out in front on this. A lot of our industrial affiliates recreated the work we had done and confirmed that millimeter waves could work. And what this will do is it'll fundamentally change the device in our pocket. Our cell phone, which right now has just a few antennas, will basically become like the Very Large Array out in the southwest US with giant telescopes all beaming and looking for energy. We're going to have dozens of antennas in our cell phone, all the size of our pinky or a human freckle, all working together to grab energy, harvest energy that's bouncing off the walls, off the streets, off the lampposts, off our neighbor to create a cellular link. That's very exciting. The world's kind of uniformly agreed on this now, and there are standards activities going on, and Amitava, to your right, is actually a world expert on the standard-making process. Now, what does this all mean for Europe-US collaboration? Well, one area that's really important for the wireless industry as a whole is spectrum harmonization. So something very interesting happening right now, and maybe someone on this panel can give us an update on it, or someone in this room. The US being first in providing 5G spectrum for the wireless industry, and spectrum is the lifeblood of the cellular industry. You need radio spectrum allocations to be able to carry data. They got out in front on the 28 and 37, 39 gigahertz band for millimeter wave. These are these much wider bandwidth channels that will be part of 5G. The European community was balking at 28 gigahertz. Usually the lower frequencies, easier to design, easier to develop, low-hanging fruit in terms of making the transistors and the RF front ends that make up these wireless devices. So spectrum harmonization would be a very good thing, because when you harmonize the spectrum, you create a global market, and the chip makers and phone makers can instantly have a market that they know they can sell into around the world. This is why Wi-Fi really took off in the late 90s when there was spectrum harmonization in Europe, Asia, and the US. So that's one area I think we could work on. The other area is health effects. What's interesting is about 3 to 4 months ago, there was a study that came out by an Italian group which said today's cellular down at low frequencies, 1 and 2 gigahertz, are maybe dangerous. US had a similar study, came out about 2 weeks later, that said there's no evidence for carcinogenic effects of cell phones. We did a lot of research on this 5 years ago when we were starting our wireless research. We wrote a paper that the National Institutes of Health has made open public called Millimeter Safe for Generations to Come, where we studied the effects of millimeter wave, and it turns out the human body is very reflective, so very little energy is actually absorbed. And any carcinogenic effects we postulated, based on all the research we've looked at hundreds of studies in Europe, and a lot was done in Russia, to see that it's really heating. It's the effect of RF heating that could lead to health effects. And as long as you don't have RF heating, generally these low frequencies, 5 orders of magnitude below the ionizing radiation level, beyond the band gap energy where there's an ion that's split off, these are very safe. So it'd be interesting to find out. Right now there's a disparity in the safety factors. Europe's about a factor of 10 more conservative on how much RF energy is allowed to be than the US. So that would be a good thing that we could unify together. But early evidence shows that all of these cellular frequencies, even going up to millimeter waves, are still so low in frequency, 5 orders of magnitude lower than the frequencies at X-rays and gamma rays that are known to be carcinogenic. And we've studied this. I'm in radiology at NYU, and it's known that the carcinogenic effect of ionizing radiation, X-rays and gamma rays, is caused because these radiating waves have enough energy that they can split the electron out of the valence shell of an atom. And that atom now becomes unstable, and that's what leads to other growth. But if we're 5 orders of magnitude below that, there's not enough energy to, like the cue ball in billiards, to knock out that electron to cause this kind of carcinogenic issue. So my belief is millimeter waves are safe. I believe today's cellular phone is safe unless you get RF heating. And so that's another interesting area study we could look at. Finally, I think one of the key issues that the industry faces, and it'll be interesting to hear Amitava's view and also NSF's view. Well, what I see in engineering is there's so much interest in what we heard about yesterday, big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, that we're seeing less and less interest of young students wanting to get into the engineering in the United States of creating telecommunications, new protocols, new theories, new coding theories, the technology that goes into cell phones. See very aggressive energy and investment in Asia in the telecommunications space. But I don't see it in the US. Students are kind of going away from the area of communications and going to computing and big data. So the question is, where are we going to get the future generations of students that can do the ingenuity and create the technology and the standards that go into 6G and 7G and so on. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ted. So with this, I just have to make one little remark because it's very typical that a US guy stands up and says the market share of CDMA and GSM was the same, because in 2010, that was when both sort of peaked. There were 500 million CDMA phones and 5 billion GSM phones. So that's how numbers become same. I guess you're starting to tweet soon. With this, let's have Amitava have the floor and give his points.
I disagree with you kindly, Gerhard, on that comment.
It's just the US part of the market share, not the world.
So thank you, Gerhard. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Marty, for your presentations. And I'll give an industry perspective of what is going on in the industry. And the whole goal of 5G is to make our lives better. And what we see in 5G is the interaction of man and machine. So the man and machines are integrated to make our life better. Eventually, in 100 years, the machine will take over and the Skynet will be operational in 100 years. That's what I predict. Okay, so so the first phase of 3GPP is done. It is release 15. The specs are out. The commercial version of 5G will be deployed sometime next year, middle of next year, end of next year. And it covers all frequencies. What I said, usage of both sub-6 gigahertz and millimeter wave spectrum. We have this feature called massive MIMO, both at sub-6 gigahertz and millimeter wave. We have this lean carrier design, flexible frame structure, scalable OFDM-based interface, scalable numerology. We have advanced channel coding with introduction of LDPC code and polar codes for control channel. Then LTE is not going away. We have the aggregation of LTE and 5G carriers. And for millimeter wave deployment, one of the key things is integrated access and backhaul. Without that, it is not economically viable to deploy a millimeter wave network. We have flexible connectivity, beamformed control and access channel. Whereas in LTE, the control channels were not being formed. In 5G, everything is being formed, and the higher spectral usage. The spectrum situation is say 600 megahertz in North America. We'll be deploying LTE and 5G. Actually, T-Mobile US will be deploying 5G at 600 megahertz. We have 3.4 to 3.6 LTE 5G deployment, and then we have the 28 and 39 gigahertz, which are for hotspots coverage in Korea, Japan, and US. Moving forward, you see in 5G, we'll have the combination of low and high bands. 5G is not millimeter wave, it is a combination of sub-6 gigahertz and millimeter wave bands. So you see the low bands, so the low bands are used for IoT and critical communication, mainly for massive MTC. You see, and I don't think you need 5G for that. You can get by with LTC, LTE-M, or narrowband IoT. Then you have this mid-band where we are deploying 5G at 3.5, LTE at AWS band, and you can get 10x capacity with LTE grid and massive MIMO. And then you go to the hotspot situation where you get 1000x local capacity. As you increase, go to millimeter wave bands. So we are using high bands for capacity, low band for massive MTC, and low latency critical communication. Now, what is coming in? What is in release 16? You see, these are the study items which have started. So these are the non-orthogonal multiple access. From my perspective, I don't see, you will get 10, 20% improvement. This, I think, is very important, non-terrestrial networks, which includes HAPS, high-altitude platforms, satellite communications, etc. Then this V2X, this is important, integrated access and backhaul and unlicensed spectrum for 5G radio. So these are the study items which have already started. And these are a slew of proposals which are being considered. So this air-to-ground communication, location enhancements, which is key to 5G, 5G above 52.6 gigahertz. The millimeter wave which we have, which have been standardized, is for frequencies below 52.6 gigahertz. I don't know why this particular 52.6 was chosen, but anyway. So these are some of the expected proposal, and guess what? These are the RAN 1 items. So in the recent meeting, which concluded last week, these were the things which are approved. So it means this is the RAN 1 led items, which is further enhancements to new radio MIMO, new radio V2X, new radio unlicensed band, NOMA study items, and non-terrestrial study items, then UE power consumption, NR positioning, etc. So these are the things which have been approved as study items and work items. So suggested topics for EU-US collaboration, I think it aligns with what Gerhard and Ted had. I will say NR-based V2X at millimeter wave. That is important because V2X has already been standardized probably for LTE, but you need terabytes of data, and to do that, you need millimeter wave. So this is one area of collaboration. I think this is a great promise, air-to-ground communication. I think in disaster scenarios and public safety scenarios over the seas, this balloon-based communication is very important, and we need 5G for that. Then machine learning, that's a buzzword. Everybody is working on machine learning. So I think I have looked into this. Let us see what can physical layer deep learning, how can we implement deep learning in physical layer? Can this be achieved? And these are all the basics which needs to make Skynet achievable, you see, or viable. Then this is one important thing I like to emphasize, that how you deploy millimeter wave. What is the strategy of deploying millimeter wave? Because there are a lot of issues. You have this 200 millimeters coverage in a mobile environment, and you have this issue of blocking and penetration. So how do you handle millimeter wave deployment? Can you use deep learning to do this? And of course, 5G above 52.6 gigahertz terahertz communication. This is an area which needs to be investigated, and part of this is the RFIC development. But I think from collaboration point of view, US is very sensitive to export control with respect to RFIC technology, so that needs to be sorted out. So these are my suggestions, and I have, Yanning told me to give a presentation on terahertz communication, and I have one couple of slides on that if you want. Yes. Do you want me to present that? Yeah. Okay. So I want, how do you do that? Later in the breakout session. Yeah, in the breakout session, we'll present that. So this is all I have. So this is very promising. I'm really excited, and I agree with Ted. Everybody wants to go to investment banking. They don't want to build bridges. They want to build dreams, you see, all the students. That's my issue, you see. They want to go to investment banking. They want to go to big data. But the nuts and bolts of engineering on how to build bridges and dams, they're not doing it. And that is where U.S. is falling behind on that. And the brightest is going to make money. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Amitabha. So after having this deep dive on the technology, now, David, you're going to give us some ideas of how CPS is going to help 5G make money. Yes?
We'll actually see what we're going to have. So I'm interesting when I got my doctorate at Maryland. It was in controls and networking. I went into the controls side and really haven't done much in networking for many, many years. So when I'm program director, I lead two fairly substantial programs at NSF. And both of those have direct applicability to kind of the landscape of advanced wireless and providing kind of the glue that enables. So the programs I lead are Smart Connected Community Program, which is around a $20 million annual budget, and the Cyber Physical System Program. Cyber Physical System Program over the last 4 years has spent roughly $40 million a year. Now, all those really pale in terms of the 251 million euro. I was really impressed by that kind of number. We can only aspire. Okay, so, wrong way. So, some motivation. Why do we start talking about advanced wireless networking and some of these capabilities? In part, it's really what kind of networking foundations do we really need if we start to think about smart connected communities and the applications that really will help make people's lives easier. An important part is we don't call this the Smart Cities program. What we really look at is connected communities. Connection is the networking part, and the community part really means it doesn't simply have to work in a city. It could work in a small town. It could work in a rural region. So we're looking at something that's broader in scope than just cities. Interesting point that was raised earlier about where people are really working these days. One of the things that we have really thought about are what are the technology needs of communities? And here are just listed a few of those. You mentioned the big data analytics, sensing, control, automation, things like cyber physical system, health and wellness. One of the newer things that we have going is human technology frontier, where the question really is, will AI put everyone out of work? It's a tough question. And socio-technical questions. Those are kind of technologies and needs, and what those result in are a set of investments in programs. So those investments in programs include things like cyber physical systems, smart and connected health that uses networking infrastructure, big data with hubs and spokes, robotics, National Robotics Initiative, importantly, the fairly large security program. In fact, the SATSI program, Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace, is probably the largest multidisciplinary program at NSF. And one of the key ones that I'm going to talk about is platforms for advanced wireless. And part of that story, though, is that kind of creates a model that NSF has started applying over the last several years in terms of creating platforms, creating public-private partnerships, and using those as a vehicle for advanced technology, for funding advanced research. So wireless networking at NSF, let me go back to build it, there are many different research programs within the wireless area, investments on the order of $75 million a year, and it's fundamental to much of the work that we see published today. One of the good parts and one of the things that we look at in terms of an overall NSF portfolio is the vibrancy of a program. And so when we look at things like CPS, NRI, advanced wireless, our NETS core programs, one of the ways that you look at is, are there a lot of startups that are being generated? Is there technology transfer to industry? In addition to how many papers get published. All of those are key elements that we look at. And let me let this build. And what we are looking at in terms of advanced wireless is taking a lot of theoretical ideas in terms of networking capabilities and seeing, can we really get those to work in practice? So ideas on massive MIMO, spectrum sharing, and full duplex upload, download capability. All of those kinds of capabilities are really critical to enabling the applications that we see today, either in a smart connected environment, in a cyber physical system, in operations with drones, and really almost any of our infrastructure systems. So that leads to Platform for Advanced Wireless Research, which is the start of kind of a model that NSF's developed. So one of the issues is, and I've been a big backer in the ideas of test beds. And so I've worked a number of years at Boeing, involved in a number of DARPA programs that were really test bed programs. One of those was called Software-Enabled Control, where Tariq Samad was one of the major performers. I worked on the platform side, and the idea was you need a platform to enable high-fidelity research. And that platform should be scalable, both something that academic researchers can download, utilize in their laboratory, should include a hardware-in-the-loop element, which enables you to start to take research into the real world, and then a test bed that enables you to actually not just test things in a laboratory, but bring things into the real world. In my background, it was really, let's fly things over the desert. Let's actually see, do these work? What happens with reflections? What happens when systems bank and antennas lose coverage and you have signal dropouts? So the idea is you need things that go beyond toy data sets. You know, in many of the research that we see through NSF, you start with toy data sets, but you really have to advance into real world. We want things that are repeatable. We want things that we can publish, and we want to be able to learn from our mistakes. What that leads to is, one, the idea of public-private partnerships, because when you start to look at test beds and the kinds of things you might want to actually build for a wireless platform for research, they're not insignificant funding. And one of the issues is always, it's a very competitive environment. So how do you get people to both provide funding to enable research, have the government provide funding, and the only way to do that is, one, start to look at what are the enabling pre-competitive research ideas. And we start with that through the National Science Foundation. We want open access test beds. People can plug in their capabilities in the real world, and we want to bring in industry funds. So we started this this idea goes back several years at NSF, where we started some programs with Intel. So NSF, Intel, CPS security was one. There's some ongoing programs further with Intel and VMware. It's a model that we like, and it enables us to grow our portfolio without having to take money from other programs. So what are part of the platform for advanced wireless? I have to give a lot of credit for these charts to Thiaga Nandagopal, who proves, one of the things that this chart proves is that, one, NSF can work with industry, and two, NSF program directors actually talk to each other. I think there's some suspicion that, you talk to one program director, you can tell him something, you can tell another story to someone else. We actually talk to each other and enjoy each other's company and share projects and ideas. So there are a number of charter members, including both hardware and software vendors, software developers, a number of them that were mentioned today by the panel. In fact, I really learned a lot more about 5G and beyond than I knew before today. And what this provides is really drivers for success, which are reproducibility of results, actually building in an operational context. It's critical, interoperability, so essentially getting rid of technology silos and open access. Open access to researchers as well as fairness in access. So it doesn't mean that everyone has to have millions and millions of dollars of platform availability. They can use this. And it enables discussions on usability, programmability, diversity. So NSF is part of the Platform for Advanced Wireless. We're doing 4 city-scale platforms, 5 years of funding, and $20 to $25 million of cash and in-kind, plus NSF funding. So there's a Power Project Office. Glenn Rickert is part of it. It includes, the project office helps to work the selection of specific projects. Working to build the platforms includes US Ignite and Northeastern, and enables working both across industry and with the research community. And the important part is early stage research that really enables the development, creation of these new wireless devices and the technologies that people at this conference are really talking about. And what is one goal? It's revolutionize the wireless ecosystem, maintain US leadership in the sector. So what is that really? Let me just briefly, 2 of these are the Powder platform with Salt Lake City, looking at massive MIMO base station, ending programmability, diverse spectrum access, and Cosmos cloud-enhanced open software-defined mobile testbed in New York City. There are other activities going on in New York City from the smart and connected community perspective. One of those is a small edge computing project with University of Arizona, I think Columbia, as well as the Harlem Silicon something, which is really an exciting project in terms of providing bandwidth for others. It's an application-driven environment for experimentation. So the idea is what applications does it enable and what can I do well with it? And back to your point, how do I get people to work? Most of these rely on things like computing, machine learning. The actual engineering side, so the bridge building, in fact, if you look at the kind of ideas we get, those are all machine learning for sensing and active control type things. So many of those engineering principles are really being replaced by the computing and machine learning. And there is some need to look at what does that next generation do. So let me throw out a couple of ideas. One is, what does collaboration really mean? And I think it was brought up yesterday, a couple of models. One is the researcher-driven, essentially, I have collaborators both in EU or other countries, a US researcher, and it's really an informal ad hoc collaboration. One of the challenges that we see at NSF, and I can talk to this from our smart connected community perspective, we actually were soliciting, in our webinar, we said, you know, it would be nice if someone had one city, one community in the US, one community outside the US, and brought in research both from the US side as well as research sponsored by a outside, could be an EU community, could be somewhere else. And we really didn't get much response from that. And one of the challenges I see is that at the individual research level, there's a tendency to think, you know, we'll do workshops and all this, but in terms of building a big project together, it requires almost a bilateral type of arrangement, which is kind of the arrangement that we have with Finland. We've had arrangements like that with JST, Japan Science and Technology. We're discussing ideas like that with other countries. But unless the researchers talk together and start bringing funding sources together, that collaboration may be very informal, very ad hoc, may be very productive, but it doesn't necessarily produce a larger scale project. And those larger scale projects are things that, to some degree, when we look at the kind of technology needs that integrate the control, communication, computing, and essentially building cyber-physical systems together, those bigger applications don't necessarily come together. And you know, that's kind of one of the areas that we're certainly interested in from the NSF side and might be an interesting source of discussion here. Thank you.
So thanks, David. So if we look at different topics here, let's first have a little round, and then we open for questions from the audience. Obviously, we touched all kinds of different areas. We touched technical areas, of which obviously sort of the, let's say, Matti, Ted, and Amitabha were talking about 100 gigs and beyond, yes, going to the next generation of frequencies. Then we also had basically David touching on power, or however you pronounce it, or sort of.
That's it.
And saying that we possibly have to make sure that we don't only do theory, but we have to test the stuff to make sure that we really influence the industry. And I'm certainly a big fan of testbeds. Now, let's start out with that, David, if I may. Yes, and Ted, you can jump in because you're part of one of the power guys. So as a person that has built possibly the biggest academic testbed so far, with 27 cells in downtown Dresden, covering all of Dresden, to show basically that coordinated and multi-point distributed MIMO can be done, and convincing everybody, every company on planet Earth and cell that came to visit us and go into the testbed. I saw the impact. But that was a testbed with an intent. We did all the theory. We couldn't convince anybody because they said, if you don't test it, it's not going to be convincing. So we built a testbed for an intent. In the case of power, there's no intent. So that, for me, is the question: how can you convince a PhD student to write a thesis on a testbed where I'm not going to prove something to be good or bad? You know what I'm talking about? So a testbed, just to be a testbed, that's like if you look at the testbed, I mean, the 5G IC in Surrey is doing the same. They're building a testbed to build a testbed. Yes, and if you look at the traction of the 5G IC's testbed, it's almost zero. I don't know, Matti, if you see it differently, but I mean, so the question now for me is, if we're talking about just to get the testbed thing, and then we would like to possibly move on to 6G topics, but I want to understand that a little better, because this could be sort of a generic kind of understanding mismatch between motivating a PhD student to show the planet Earth that my idea is right, or just to build up a toy.
So part of the idea of test beds, so you're right, you don't build a test bed to build a test bed. You build a test bed in order to prove, in order to, one, create a stimulating environment that enables you to develop the component technologies, the research that plugs into the test bed, which provides kind of the rest of the services and environment that enables you to prove that, hey, my component technology can actually work in a larger scale environment. And that type of research is the kind of thing that shows, one, you can write great papers, you can get published, you can get further research funding to do it. So it goes from the idea into something that I can not just do a laboratory scale
Exactly.
test, and I can actually test it with other services and learn from those, the operating environment that it's placed within, to see, one, collect a set of metrics on the performance of how does my idea perform by itself.
That's why I would have seen like the 5 different test beds or 4 to really have sort of an intent, each and one of them, to prove to planet Earth that some idea is going to be.
Let me add to that, because it's a fair
maybe
question.
It's not being shown. That's
No,
what I'm
it's
saying.
a fair question, because generally in engineering, computer science, we build things purpose-driven. And your argument is, why put all this money into something with no real purpose other than to be there to provide a platform? There's a number of value points that need to be explicitly said that maybe you haven't recognized. One is, there's huge value in the integration and creation of a pseudo commercial grade network, a testbed that can actually accommodate many different visions and many different applications. There's huge educational value. The vendors providing the equipment in kind learn a lot, so there's some educational value. The second thing is, it's kind of like venture capital funding. You're providing this thing, you're making an investment, you don't know what's going to come out, but there may be 1 or 2 good ideas out of every 10 or 20 that actually lead to a new technology breakthrough, that lead to a new concept. There are some test beds on the West Coast that actually led to a couple of startup companies that got acquired for very high values and actually created part of the technology that's used in 4G. So NSF has some wins in these test beds, even though we don't know exactly what they are. In the case of the New York City test bed with NYU, Columbia, and Rutgers, we're taking an earlier version of 4G WiMAX and rolling it out to 50,000 households in Harlem. So there will actually be low-income users of the technology that we're going to try on the test bed. There could be new applications, new services provided, not just for the human value, but also the fact that you can't put your ideas as an academic or even industry onto a commercial grade network. You can't go to a Verizon or a T-Mobile and say, I've got this new idea for compression. let me try it. They're not going to let you put it on the network.
Amitabha, maybe you want to add something? Yes?
Yes, with the PAWR, what I see, they are too late because 5G will be commercially deployed next year. So what value PAWR will add? If they had deployed this 4 or 5 years back, it would have been of great value, but they are too late on this.
Okay. Now, if we look at Amitabha, if you look at what Matti is doing, yes? He's getting 251 million euros funding, I guess, at Oulu alone? No. Just Oulu. Just the university. Yeah. To address 4 topics, of which only one is new, right? You said ultra-reliable, low-latency communication, that's 5G. Mobile edge cloud, that's 5G. Applications, that's 5G. But terahertz electronics, that's new. So how on earth can you pull that kind of a thing off?
First of all, the targets for this national flagship were twofold. You have to keep doing international standards academic research, plus you have to make great impact to society and industry. This impact for society and industry we do through our 5G test network. We are helping industry to demonstrate and pilot lots of 5G evolution versions as well through our testbed.
Okay, so you're actually buying equipment?
Nothing to do with the equipment. We already have it.
But I mean, 251 million, that's over 5 years or whatever it is. It's, I don't know how many people, but at least, I don't know what kind of salaries you pay, but like thousands of people.
Not thousands. Let's not go into the budget details. but yeah, it's big one, and actually it will cover, our faculty is currently of 500 researchers. It will cover all of our faculty plus some more. But anyways, I would like to go a little bit back to this 5G test network thing. And I agree with Gerhard that you have to be really focus-driven and you must have a purpose for doing that. Our purpose from day one was that we want to demonstrate new capabilities for future operator business models. We have been talking about micro-operator-based business model which relies on local spectrum licensing models. And our government is going to make in a few months' time decisions, and we hope that the answer is positive, and yes, we can launch first national 5G micro-operator company as an outcome of our 5G test.
Gerhard, I want to make one point that follows on what Matti said, to challenge your argument and challenge your position that power is too late or this is too much money. Don't underestimate the impact of what these kinds of grants do for things behind the scene that grease the wheels for future telecom. In the New York City example, you may argue that the power award from NSF is too late to have an impact. But what that grant did is it allowed us to go to the mayor's office in New York City and actually free up fiber optic access that the city owns to provide for this test bed. And in doing that, it challenged the city to think about making more availability of its fiber for commercial services, for carriers that you sell your equipment to. And similarly, Matti, as you do this, you're going to illuminate carrier weak points and kind of bring out pressure points from unexpected places. This is the value of fundamental research. So even though the test bed made too late on a technical
I don't know if it's fundamental research if you're using WiMAX, which sort of lost out.
Well, that was years ago. That was a previous test bed. This will be 5G.
Okay.
But the point is, it creates things behind the scenes that gets partners to think a new way, and it opens up markets.
But Ted, one of the things I like to point out, the 5G, which will be deployed, the first version, it will have all the components of edge computing, network slicing. It will have gigabits of data rate.
But here's the problem. The industry is developing this 5G. You saw the slides. You presented them on a timeline that is so furiously fast, you don't have time to think about and look at more advantages and more capacity. No. That's the land of academia, where we can try things and bring out new technologies that eventually will filter down to industry.
So that's the question. So I want to see, for example, a virtual reality application where I sit in my home and get the experience of a stadium. Can PAWR do that? And that's the thing, use the components of 5G technology and give me something which
Here's what power does. Here's what power does. It allows some professor or some small startup somewhere to have that idea, to have that application, to come to New York and put it on the network and prove it. I can't go to a Verizon and do that.
But Matti, you still wanted to complete. Or are you done with your...
No, not quite. So how do we spend this huge budget? So we really do see that our field is going through a major change. Although there are big challenges related to this high-frequency radio engineering, there's no doubt of that. But even with current level of radio connectivity capabilities, we have hell of a lot things to do at the network side, how to make it truly autonomous, efficient, intelligent, how to provide all these future verticals needs, even with 4G technologies, that we are very far away from that. So we have to involve a lot of new disciplines. We have to understand enough of different verticals, like health or autonomous car industry or energy sector, you name it. So we have to really spread out, and that's going to need a lot of resources as well.
So one of the topics you discussed, and Ted mentioned it, and Amitava mentioned it, and David mentioned it, was machine learning, deep learning, whatever. So obviously it's a buzzword, and it was one of your quadrants and one of your slides. So is it a tool like algebra or calculus? Fantastic tools, don't get me wrong. I love that math. Yes, but for us as engineers, it's a tool that we also research on advancing the tool itself, or do you see this as an application in that? Because that's where I didn't quite get that part of it. Because Amitava was talking about as a tool for improving the PHY. That's how I understand you, right? And you were talking about it as sort of like almost an application, getting whatever real-time deep learning is.
I think it's a little bit of all of those and maybe even much more. But if you think about dynamic distributed computing, it's a huge challenge, even theoretically. And as we know, mobile cellular systems are extremely dynamic and extremely difficult to model even. And when we break it down to lots of small cells, it's going to be even more messy. And we have different types of spectrum and spectrum sharing and spectrum usage. It's a huge mess. And how can we really automate different things? For example, at physical layer, how can we learn from what happens on the street? For example, when we do pencil beam forming, maybe we can learn from where are the users typically going to do initial beam acquisition, etc. So there's a lot of really useful applications, but we don't understand that well enough, in my opinion, yet.
Yeah. So with the neural network, so you have the input and the output, and what you need to do is to train it, right? So you use 5 days of training, and it is all based on history. And
well, there are two types of training, right? There's the one online training and offline training. Those are the two different major approaches.
Yes. So it is. So you do the training, and then can we do a more efficient algorithm? For example, right, MU-MIMO, how to pair the users, right? Can you use the history to pair the users efficiently? So that is for channel state information. So with this beam forming, you receive channel state information from multiple transmission points. Can you use machine learning to simplify the process? For millimeter wave deployment, so you look at each pixel and to see whether this UE is blocked by certain events, and then predict that what kind of modulation we'll use, which base stations it will be connected to, so that we drop the outage rate. So I am talking about concrete ideas on machine learning, and machine learning is always based on training, and the training set should be very elaborate, or you have to, it should be very intensive, so that we get proper results or efficiency out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So can I?
Yes, David?
Okay, so one of the questions you asked, though, is when we talk about, so part of this is collaboration.
Yes.
And so one of the questions, and power is an idea for collaboration within certainly a U.S. ecosystem.
Right.
So the question really is, how do you push real collaboration, US and EU? So for example, what our friend from Nokia is talking is really, okay, these are great Nokia investments, development of new standards, yet that's not necessarily US-EU collaboration. It's Nokia-US, Nokia-EU collaboration. To some degree, the question here, I think on the table is really, how do we, what defines US-EU collaboration in this space? What are the opportunities that go beyond perhaps, I know in the CPS discussion yesterday, yes, we create workshops that we bring US, German, Japanese, other researchers together, go to Hawaii, go to Germany, go to Japan. That only goes so far.
Well, the good news is Thyaga on our stage at the Brooklyn 5G Summit this past April said that these power test beds are open to anyone, Europe, Asia, anyone.
So David, your question is basically, what is the format? Because I mean, the workshops are happening. We don't need
right.
to say,
Yeah, no, that's exactly my point, which is
exchange of information. We are doing now exchange of information. That's all. But
right,
the concrete steps.
Right. That's my point. Is the power is an open test bed, so it's kind of you come, and we can work with you, but that still isn't. That creates an environment that can foster collaboration, but it doesn't itself generate, it doesn't build essentially, okay, I'm a researcher here in the EU, I do want to play with power, but I need to get funding from on the EU side. Perhaps I have a US partner working together. So the question really is, how do you grow this collaboration, then go beyond these very informal things?
So what I'm, see, we are doing all these PICASSO workshops, and which is good. We are exchanging information. The thing is that we don't have a set for the EU-US collaborations. We don't have a set of deliverables for dates with dates and what exactly we are doing. That's what is lacking, you see, and that's what needs to be flushed out.
And that was my point with, so NSF has done a few of these, and our friend from Finland has brought some of those up. And so kind of the question really is, what is the right model? Or what are the right models that can really go beyond the informal and actually build these put larger ideas together and essentially grow things in a more organized way?
Here's an idea, because I've seen this work in America very powerfully with the NSF Engineering Research Centers. The ERCs, especially the first generation of ERCs, really brought a set of committed faculty who, from all different disciplines, and worked very, very hard together to create a culture of interdisciplinary research. Maybe there needs to be a joint EU-US ERC vision. Very large centers, I mean, big money. Maybe not up to your level, but, maybe an order of magnitude less, but, several tens of millions of dollars that get several faculty from the EU and US really committed on a vision. The ERCs have a target. They have a kind of a pseudo-deliverable, a vision to change the world, to make impactful change. I was lucky. I was a grad student in one of those at Purdue, the first one in intelligent manufacturing. That's where Wi-Fi came out. I wanted to do wireless in factories, and there was no wireless communication. That's just one example. There were many students that did a lot of different things. So maybe that's what's needed, a big, focused ERC-type cross-continental program.
Or maybe not so big, because maybe the distance means that you just want 3 here and 3 there. So, but that's a different story.
Well, you need a culture.
I don't know if
I think you're getting to the cultural issue and a focus and a drive and kind of a moonshot with a lot of people working on the same area.
Because sometimes what I'm saying is big centers, just having geographically local makes them more effective than scattering all the money all over the place. Like you have like this billion euro flagships, which are all over.
I think the first generation ERCs in the US were more effective because they were generally at one institution. I think as you saw later generation ERCs spread around the different universities, I don't have any concrete data, this is just anecdotal, but maybe they didn't make the impact that the first or second generation ERCs did.
I think a strong signal or message should be sent to Commission in Europe. They have a tendency to spread out the money all possible countries on the planet. Small amounts, very small amounts.
Breadcrumbs.
So it's not even enough for travel funds. Just the last example, this Brazil thing that we are both involved with. So, and Gerhard and myself, we have been involved with many international programs through EU. And I have to admit that working with US groups is very natural. We have the same cultural background. We don't need to learn to understand each other's thinking, and that message should be sent out. When we work with Brazilians, Asian countries, it's very difficult. I would not like to say impossible, but close to that sometimes. And if they see the value and the, let's say the similarities of the needs of industry in US and EU, they might actually be willing to pour some more money.
Okay, questions from the audience? Yes, in the back.
Thank you. Stripping, this question is for Dr. Rappaport. Stripping, and my name is David Bain. I'm with the technology, I'm a wireless entrepreneur, as well as a member of the nonprofit Technology Safety Council, which is concerned with digital wellness and well-being. So stripping the electron, or not stripping the electron, may not represent a comprehensive and holistic test of whether a device usage is safe. My question for you is, would it be an area for broader collaboration to look at the broader principles for safe device usage, safe for self, safe for society? Perhaps, just another idea to throw out there, if the ship has sailed on 5G standards, that could be a direction that power or Nokia money in Oulu could be directed towards. Find the guy who makes the tar, the pine tar juice or something like that. Maybe one or two of those 500 people could.
Ted, do you want to take that?
Yeah, to your fundamental question, is there room for broader research on safety of wireless devices? I think absolutely. I think it's appropriate and needed. It's always good to have more information, although it's hard to prove a negative. And I was offering the valence electron issue as a way to fundamentally explain why it's known and acknowledged that X-rays and ionizing radiations above the gamma rays and X-ray frequencies are known to be carcinogens. They are known to be because it can be proven and there's a physical effect. And my point is we're operating at so many orders of magnitudes at lower energy levels that that's not a viable way to induce the known carcinogenic effect. So I think it's worthwhile studying other things. And by the way, safety is not just radiating energy. It's also the use of the device, texting while driving. There are so many issues that are transforming the way our society works. If you walked in downtown Manhattan or DC and almost walk into people that are on their, looking at their smartphone, I mean, that's a safety issue. The fortunate thing is 5G and 6G are actually going to address this. The wireless device will soon have a radar that will image and have virtual augmented reality, so you can look at your device and it'll tell you if you're going to walk into someone in the next few years.
Finally.
That's coming. People are working on that. There's patents filed.
And people are working on having basically red lights in the pavement for pedestrians. So there's a lot of activity, but these devices are changing the way humanity lives, and there's a need for safety study in those areas. Second question from the back, Eva? And then Svetlana?
Yeah, thank you. I was listening to the question from David, where are we going with the EU-US collaboration in 5G? And I found it very interesting that this question came from him, because there has been a call in the Horizon 2020 program and in the NSF program on collaboration. Well, these two calls have been pointing to each other, so there should have been some collaboration through those two calls. But I also heard that there was some kind of mismatch in the expectations from each of those. And I was wondering, where are we going in EU-US collaboration in 5G? Is there any perspective?
6G, let's say 6G. 5G is done. David, you want to take that?
So, could there be some kind of collaborative program that gets developed? Sure, there could be. One of the critical points is, and I go back to a couple of years ago, we had a CPS EU summit, and the real question that gets asked at both sides is, what's the value proposition in terms of how does the US side benefit from leveraging, say, EU or other international research, and how do the other countries, the other participants, what value do they get? And we've demonstrated that value in the kind of bilateral activities that we've done. So could there be one in 6G? Yeah, there could be. Again, one has to start diving into the real details of what that collaboration would mean in specific areas of benefit to each.
Freezing Svetlana. You look cold.
Thank you. You mentioned, so my question is about mechanism of collaboration. You mentioned that perhaps engineering research center is a model, but you have in the US university industry cooperative center funded by NSF, about 50 of them, right? And we have, they have international members, okay? And as far as I understand, research results are pulled together for the benefit of the companies. And we have in Europe also, we have clusters with industrial participation with university. What do you think about this way of collaboration?
But the funding mechanics is very different. In Europe, the company gets money to carry out the research. In the US, the company provides money to carry out the, so in the US, it costs money. In Europe, I get money. That's a very different funding mechanism.
But you are speaking about European programs, okay? But I'm speaking about for clusters. Yeah. They have industrial funding. For co-funding, okay? So it's also co-funding from industries. I'm not speaking about European research program. I'm speaking about.
Yeah, there are a number of IUCRC programs in the U.S. I was the director of one of those. I'll be quite candid. The money level was pretty low, and there were intellectual property right issues that made it difficult to be an entrepreneurial university. And so it was easier for me to go directly to the companies where I had relationships and had trust and ask them to fund. And the companies trust us with no IPR agreements to do good research and to help them and to get them students that can graduate and go into their companies. So unless the funding level is significantly large enough, it's hard to attract, I think, the kind of focus and talent and real game-changing energy to create something. And that's why I go to the ERC model. That's why I think Matti is well-deserved. If you've ever seen his university and what's happened in Oulu, it's just amazing, the potential and the capability and the talent that exists there. It's as well as the pine tar. But it's fascinating. So unless you have a critical mass and really fund it, it's hard to get the buy-in of faculty. I mean, look, the problem with academia is all these faculty are, companies of one. It's hard to get collaboration to happen unless everyone is really bought in and wants to change the world, and you get their attention by putting money, and that's why the ERC is at a kind of a level. I think a cross-continent, cross-Atlantic ERC model could be very effective. It's a very small investment to get the buy-in of a lot of good minds to really work on one thing. It could happen because we have a model.
The very last question, and then we're asking.
Do you think this you think this 5G technology will result in lower cost data plans per month, or do you think it will actually cost more to have a mobile device in your pocket?
Great question. I think everyone should answer that on the panel. I'll give my first answer. I think if you look at what's happened in the semiconductor and telecom world, it's unbelievable the value we get per dollar we pay. The money we pay now for bandwidth access is probably what we paid 10 years ago, and we get so many orders of magnitude more. I think the value to us as a consumer will continue to go up per dollar. That's my belief.
Yes, I think the prices will come down eventually, yes. Because you see, for millimeter wave, the base stations will be all in one, a small form factor, and the technology should be there so that you can deploy it. Really, it is automatically using self-organizing network and stuff like that. So it'll get cheaper. You see, where the price point will come down both for devices and infrastructure.
David, do you want to say something?
Actually, my point, it would be great to see the device price go down, because what we've really seen lately is the device, with the Apple 10, the device prices essentially reaching almost a stratospheric level. And the interesting question is to relate this to models in third world, developing countries, where the wireless access has to be much cheaper, and the wireless devices are similarly many times less expensive.
You see the carrier subsidizing that device price, though, a lot.
Matti?
5G will change how the networks look like. Like Amitava said, that they're coming into household, small form size equipment. But it will not happen if spectrum regulation is not going to support it. And if it supports it, the whole value chain is going to be changed. We are not only under the mercy of mobile network operators. You can become your own operator. You can lease some of the capabilities of the network from bigger operator, and so on and so on. So I don't think we are not addressing enough yet the change potential that 5G will bring, and that should be even discussed amongst us researchers.
Yeah, to Marty's point, there will be private industrial network, right? So where a private like you and me can operate this network. So this is one of the key things, 5G, private industrial network.
So for me, I always say 5G is like the first Carl Benz automobile. Yes, you take a carriage and put a motor underneath, and that you call a car. And 5G is exactly that. So 5G, we're testing out so many new things like network slicing, low latency, ultra reliable, low latency, tactile internet, you name it, you got it. It is a bag, a millimeter wave. You're testing out everything on planet Earth at once. So 5G for me is just a big testing standard, debugging standard for us to learn a lot and then make 6G happen. Now, talking about your cost, obviously we will also have to learn about pricing, because I do believe the ARPU, the average revenue per user, should go up, but not necessarily per device, because we're going to have not only 10 devices, but hundreds of devices connected to the network. And obviously, so to make this a viable business, the ARPU has to go up. And we'll see how that happens. That's my point on this. So with this, let's go into the coffee break and enjoy an earlier start of the next session. So have fun. And thank you to, of course, to our panelists. And for those that want to go spend time with us in the breakout session this afternoon, you're more than happily invited to do that, where we're probably going to be talking a lot about terahertz communication.
And IoT.